So, unmet needs in rosacea, I think, are primarily around flushing. We have at the alpha agonists that do a nice job with fixed facial erythema, but we're not quite there yet with flushing. We have two things that people use quite frequently: the beta blockers, with carvedilol appearing to be the most effective with the fewest side effects, and botulinum toxin, which unfortunately is expensive and generally uncovered for this indication. So that's the area in which I'd like to see some work being done. Perhaps that flushing could also help a menopausal flush as well. So kill two birds with one application. As far as acne is concerned, I'm happy there too with my toolbox. In the last 10 or 15 years, we've come a long way in topical treatment for acne and rosacea. And in acne, I guess my wish list would include something that works as beautifully as isotretinoin with fewer side effects. But that's sort of a pie in the sky crazy wish. Isotretinoin is more than 40 years old now and is still the gold standard in acne therapy. So perhaps some of the newer lasers will be able to give us the improvement and the durability of response that we see from isotretinoin, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
So I would say first and foremost is that these diseases are somewhat rare. And so we don't see them very often in practice. I think most practicing dermatologists would agree to that, which means when a patient does show up in your office, it's a little bit outside of your normal day-to-day dermatology that you practice. And so that I think puts everybody on a little bit of an edge, to make sure that you're getting the diagnosis, that you have everything in place to get an accurate diagnosis. And then, of course, that what's new with treatments of these diseases. If you don't see them very often, sometimes it's hard to keep up with. So I would say the number one challenge is just making sure that you have a confirmed diagnosis of these rare diseases, and being able to recognize atypical presentations. And so many of the cases that I present and use for teaching points is really that there are more and more atypical clinical presentations. So we think of these as blistering disorders, but more and more frequently we're recognizing that both pemphigus and especially pemphigoid can present with non-blistering clinical findings. And so it's important to recognize those and keep them in mind, because the diagnosis can definitely be more challenging in non-blistering presentations.
Yeah, so in the course of my lecture, I spend probably about half of it really talking about the therapeutic space in HS, and it's been sort of bare for quite a long period of time, but recently we've had a lot more activity. We had only one single approved systemic therapeutic option in the case of adalimumab for a number of years since the mid-2010s, and so I do touch on some of the data there just to remind folks about where we've been and why some of our endpoints are structured the way that they are. I then take a sort of relatively deep dive into secukinumab, which we've now had for a number of months, I think pretty close to a year at this point in time. Another medication that is really working on a different mechanism of action, IL-17A, that is unlocking just another therapeutic space for our patients. After that, I then talk a little bit about some of our pipeline therapies and what's the closest to coming into the clinic that's going to help people out. And so bimekizumab, obviously, we have for psoriasis, we'll have for HS very soon, an IL-17A and F blocker that, again, has some very exciting data that we've been sitting on for a little while now, as those phase 3 results were presented not exactly anytime recently, but a few conferences ago. Additionally, I talk more about the IL-17 space in the case of nanobodies. There's some data there, both in terms of IL-17A and IL-17A and F blockade, essentially innovative ways of delivering molecules that are not exactly antibodies, but smaller, therefore have better penetration. And then finally, I rounded out by talking a little bit about oral JAK inhibition, which I think has been an exciting one, given that we're familiar with them in other therapeutic spaces, and HS is going to potentially have its turn. And then I round out talking a little bit about topical JAK inhibition.
pediatric guidelines of care are a couple of years old that the AED put out, and the National Psoriasis Foundation as well has commented on the best methods of therapy for the pediatric population. So whenever I'm asked to do a presentation, clearly I try to read a lot more than what you would normally just in private practice, so that I can do summaries and be very succinct and tell my colleagues what the current evidence is. And I want them to be aware of some of the medications they're using that perhaps have just been a habit, as opposed to being something that there's true evidence for, and perhaps is even recommended that it not be used in the pediatric population. So we can look at the new medications that have been added, new oral agents, new topical agents, and even some of the biologic agents that are going to get expanded indications for use in psoriatic disease. And if you have the chance to treat more than one disease at a time, which we often do by treating Crohn's disease and psoriasis, or psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis, we need to know what those are and be able to initiate those therapies and work with our colleagues in other specialties so that we can coordinate care.
The biggest things for me this year, the single most useful new drug is oral roflumilast. So roflumilast, it's a PDE4 inhibitor. It's FDA approved for COPD, but it went generic last year. And so now it's cheap. So we can get it for about $10 a month if we go through a mail order pharmacy, $15 a month through a regular pharmacy, and that's without insurance coverage. And it is a really potent PDE4 inhibitor that has randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials showing really good efficacy for psoriasis. So about 50% of people will get to PASI 90, about 70% of people will get to PASI 75. And those are really good numbers for a drug that is extremely safe. So just like a Premolast, which is the same mechanism of action, no immunosuppression, no lab monitoring. About 10% of people will get GI upset. 1% of people will get depressed. But psoriasis is a space that we have so many amazing drugs in already that that's actually not the main place I find it useful.